Thank you for joining us today. I'm Nils, the host today, and with me we have Prem, Stephanie, and Patrick, all industry experts, especially in the field around data and monetization without sacrificing user value, and to some degree in the area of AI and as it is becoming more and more important within this industry, both as a challenging factor in terms of traffic decreasing, but also on the optimization side as to how can we leverage it and in what ways to help us drive more revenue. I'm from the publishing side myself. A couple of years ago, I was running a publishing business in Germany, and I have since transitioned to building products that help publishers optimize and run their monetization operations, all while maintaining and keeping the operations in-house. That means primarily providing the products and services to help them do so. Yeah, during the session, we will be taking a look at all of the questions you're providing. So therefore, I ask you to please, if you have questions or if you have something you would like us to address, please put it in the chat and we will make sure that we can get to those and answer them. For now, I would like to give the room, starting with Stephanie, for a small introduction. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm based in New York, but I'm sure it's afternoon in most of your time frames. But I'm VP of Data Strategy and Operations, or actually just promoted to VP of Addressability and Premium Programmatic here at the Arena Group, which includes a couple titles that you might have heard of, such as Sports Illustrated, Street, Parade, and Men's Journal. I've had a long history of starting data teams from the ground up on the publishing side over the last 15 years, where they didn't exist prior, and have helped build foundations and first-party data strategies for them to take out into market. So I'm happy to be here to talk about all of the things that we're doing.
Thank you very much for joining us, Stephanie. I'll hand it over to Prem.
Hey, my name is Premesh. I'm the CEO of Premtech, former CTO of Ranker and Freestar, longtime kind of ad tech veteran, building ad stacks, working on monetization, custom ad products, video, data strategy, execution with sales teams. Just kind of from the ground up from a publisher for many, many years, obviously switching over to the vendor side for a number of years, and then now working as a fractional ad tech exec across vendors and publishers in the industry.
Thank you very much, Prem. And Patrick.
My name is Patrick McCann. I'm the Senior Vice President of Research at Raptive. Raptive, much like Nils, has roots in publisher. We used to be Cafe Mom and have evolved into our current inclination, or our current status. And I've been at Raptive for 10 years. Before Raptive, I was a data scientist at Exalate and also at Comscore. I'm also the chair of the Premtech committee that publishes the Premtech software.
Thank you very much. To jump right in, so everything that is happening around AI and overall within the industry, there's no doubt that last year has been a challenging year, and there's little doubt that this year will not be too much difference. There might be some light on the sky, but yeah, it is as it is within the industry. Certain platforms have already seen major decreases in traffic. If we look at Stack Overflow, which lost more than half of its traffic, other publishers have had similar impacts. At the moment, it's still within niches, but the trend keeps continuing. On the other side, within the publisher space, AI technology has not really been able to counteract that, or there are not really any much measures that can counteract it. And all of the optimization potential we have on the publishing end are quite limited in contrast to how the traffic is changing overall. So I would like to hand it first to Prem as to how do you see the challenges at the moment within the market, and also especially looking into the next 2 years.
Yeah, thanks. So, it's interesting. I think with everything you just said, obviously traffic decreasing across publishers is a problem, and the yield side kind of dropping as well, creates a really uphill battle across all pubs. Unfortunately, the traffic piece we can't control. There isn't much we can do to increase traffic. There's not much that we can do to battle that side of it. I do think that one thing that publishers can try to attempt to do is obviously try to increase monetization however they can, and hopefully that's not by just adding more ads to the page, just trying to find yield in other creative ways. And I think that's where AI produces some opportunities. I think going back to my days at being at the publisher side, I wish we had some of the tech that we had in place today to be able to increase yield. Like I spent, the amount of hours and months I spent while I was at Ranker trying to optimize our stacks for various and layouts for various sources of traffic just to increase yield overall was insane. And the gains were definitely worth it at the time. But the fact that we have the ability to do that, at a much more granular level now, in theory, because of AI, I think is a very large opportunity for publishers to attempt to gain back some of that lost revenue, or at least combat it in some meaningful way.
Thank you. Stephanie, how is it from your perspective?
I mean, I agree. I feel like I come mostly from the data segmentation side and like first party data strategy. So the tools available to kind of understand segmentation, the performance of them, and how they are going to work within campaigns. It used to be incredibly manual, not only in the pre-sale process of determining which segments, creating descriptions, and creating the segmentation, but also in the post-sale of or mid sale really of like how do we optimize to the best segments. That all used to be incredibly manual, and now using some tools to be able to kind of understand that has really put us in a much better place to kind of monetize our direct and programmatic campaigns in a better fashion.
Thank you. Do you want to dive a bit into the details as to how we use basically the tools and optimizations to drive more out of it?
Sure. So yeah, I feel like there's no surprise that Arena Group has probably been in the news a lot recently with the investment from a billionaire. So he's really focused on data, and that is his number one priority in this year and where investment is going to be. And so we're really investing in new technologies in three major buckets, which is going to show us the real-time value of our users and our content to aid in the recommendation of like where an ad campaign could perform best based on a set criteria or KPI. And those buckets are our CRM, contextual, and behavioral. And so what does that really look like, right? In our CRM, we plan on storing more density of those profiles on our users, giving us more cognitive abilities using large language models and AI to power those optimizations. This will enable us to deliver the right content and the revenue experiences to our users based on the cohorts that they belong in and making us a more premium destination. Then this will drive more users to SSO, subscription, newsletter pass, using creative hooks and products like quizzes and exclusive premium content that hopefully will drive more authentication. It's like stickier experience and that drive to more authentication obviously will have more value to our advertisers. And so with that, we're hoping to see about 10 to 15% of our users to be authenticated. That second bucket is contextual. And from that perspective, we're using innovative and automated tools to smartly tag our content. I think historically at the Arena Group, our CRM was homegrown. And so there's a lot of flexibility in how that content is currently tagged, and it's not consistent across any of our 250 plus sites. So we really want to understand using those automated tools to tag that content, hopefully around the IAB taxonomy standard. I think that's like number one, the foundation that you need to have before you can kind of get into the sort of granular taxonomy. And then all of this tech and data will be used to more intelligently package PMPs and programmatic deals for advertisers as we, see the third-party cookie decrease. And then that last bucket, and then I'll sorry, is behavioral. So from a behavioral perspective, we'll be centralizing all of those new advancements in technology from our user profile enhancements and cognitive capabilities using LLM, as well as our automated content tagging to create a more predictive modeling around segmentation. So kind of goes around a lot of changes with AI in this company in the new year. I think we're kind of a brand new company from where we were last year. So we're really leaning into it.
Nice, thank you. Looks like there's a lot of innovation happening within the Arena group at exploring how can we use it and how can we leverage it. Many of these optimizations are, of course, only possible for big publishers that have the scale and caliber to do it, which is all good. So I wanted to, like, Patrick, from your side, as to how can like smaller publishers leverage AI, machine learning, or otherwise to improve their operations, especially if they do not have any advertiser agency relationships and everything is happening programmatically.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Stack Overflow, a pretty or medium-sized publisher, and how they lost traffic, and a lot of people are facing this loss of traffic trend. And I think AI can actually be part of the solution of that. In the United States, we see something like 16 publisher umbrellas get the vast majority of search engine optimization traffic. And the barriers to entry to developing content that ranks well in search engines is dropping dramatically and quickly. I think that if a publisher were to start from zero now, they'd have a much less uphill climb than they did 5 or 10 years ago, because the access to tools for both writing content, doing search engine optimization, and developing social followings are all substantially automated. And that also goes for ad technology providers. So the barriers to entry to new ad tech companies are much lower. And because of generative AI, it's easier to develop tech faster, quicker, that can compete with the big players who may be moving a lot slower. And so I believe that small publishers will have an enormous variety of vendors to choose from, or management companies to take care of it for all of them, that just weren't available until very recently. And AI has been absolutely breaking down some of those barriers.
Thank you. So if we look at AI in general and from a publisher's perspective, if I am not the most technical person, and most publishers are not, to be frank and honest, it is quite difficult to understand as to what AI technology that is on the market is actually something that can drive value, what is something that is not. If we look at this perspective as to in what areas can this AI actually drive value and significant value, also in the short term and not only in a couple of years, what makes basically a good, what would be some tips around it as to figure out what is working, or what categories would you say, Prem, make sense for a publisher to actually look into AI solutions versus stick with what you have, or stick with your manual approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, from that angle, from my point of view, nothing has changed in that when you look at any vendor from a publisher standpoint, you're usually looking to increase monetization. Now, the question becomes, how are we increasing monetization? Is it a short-term gain? Is there some long-term impact? And that's where I think, partnering with the right vendors and having trust in the relationship there to be able to guide you the right way is important, because you certainly can and partner with a vendor that is using some sort of AI technology to increase revenue, but it might be causing long-term impact to your overall supply. And what do I mean by that? If you are working with someone that's doing ad placement or ad refreshes or whatnot, they certainly can increase revenue in the very near term. But as we all know from just doing this in practice in the past, that can hurt our overall supply and decrease overall monetization over time. And that's something that we all kind of need to be aware of. So it's something that, in my mind, publishers really need to be have to understand, what is being impacted, what is being changed when they work with these different types of vendors, or they do it themselves. Because the same fundamentals still apply. I mean, it's still the same systems that we're working with. It's all, when we're talking about OpenRTB, at least the same marketplace, and how we impact it is the same rules. It's just what we're trying to do is extract more value out of it. But like I said, whether it's bid enrichment, ad placement, traffic shaping, all these things have an impact, usually beneficial in most cases, but I think the important thing is to weigh the near versus long term. In some cases, you may not have a choice, but I think it's the smart thing to do is understand, and do your own research, right? Understand what that impact might be, because most folks will probably be able to tell you, and it's something you should lean on.
Thank you. Do you have one specific tip as to what you would recommend a medium-sized publisher to look into in terms of leveraging machine learning or AI or similar technologies for?
I mean, look, I think from at a minimum, trying to do some form of traffic shaping between client and server as we start moving into a cookieless world, so that you can leverage more demand, right? And it's a relatively easy thing to do, not for a publisher themselves, but for a vendor to do, because we all wanted to be able to add more demand to our stacks. We understand there's a limit to client side. We've all, maybe in some cases, have tested pre-bid server, have found you know varying results, but I think because of third-party cookies going away, identity vendors have started to step up in this side of it and being able to provide uh, more value there. And the fact that that should transfer over to server side without cookies start to create an opportunity where you can go and figure out, is there a place to be able to add more demand and decide whether for across hundreds of different types of segments that you can go build out, does this demand partner run better client side, server side, or neither in certain scenarios, whether it's mobile, desktop, geo, browser, all the kind of different segments you can kind of break out. I think that's the one clear way to go and just drive more revenue, and minimize costs.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
to add to that a bit, I think AI really opens the door to some things that were potentially too technical for many publishers in the past. So, for example, just a lot of publishers have staffs of people trafficking things in GAM, and they do many repetitive tasks. Now it's straightforward to ask Gemini or ChatGPT how to code against the GAM API, which is completely familiar with that interface. An automated competitive task, it can spit out a Python script for you to set up 1,000 line items or to change all of your campaigns to target some new geography or what have you. Things that we used to get pushback from our ad operations team saying, like, what you're asking us to do is too monotonous and it would take us days to click that many buttons, are no longer a barrier. And that's just one really simple thing. Another thing that is really important to publishers and advertisers are predicting the viewability or predicting the floors. And those are not typically generative AI tasks, but they are machine learning tasks, and generative AI can provide the code and provide the access to the libraries, whereas formerly someone may need to go get a master's in statistics like I have to have access to some of these algorithms. I am learning that beginners can often compete, and I would encourage publishers to play around. It's really exciting because there's more people with more tools than ever before. Any small task can be automated in a way that was never before possible. And the task completion agents, where you say, for example, like, here's a creative, go traffic me a line item in my ad server. These things are around the corner. Like, they're about to become ubiquitous. Like right now, you can ask ChatGPT to write you some code that does it. Soon you can ask the agent that will be published by the OpenAI company to set up the line item for you. And outsourcing of ad ops to some low labor cost country will be a thing of the past, as the price of that agent will be dramatically lower.
I love how you mentioned ChatGPT. I was thinking about this earlier, and you know, gosh, it feels bad. I feel bad saying this. Years ago, I had this hope that publishers would have more ad tech engineers on staff, which was, in hindsight, kind of hopeless because it's, it is expensive for pubs to do that. But the reality is now most publishers, not all, but most publishers have some sort of engineer available to them. And the fact that they have this accessible to them, they can go to ChatGPT, and I've used this myself, just to quickly get things out. You can go to it, ask it to write you code, and it knows about Prebid, it knows about, the browser technologies. It can do a lot, quite a bit. And as long as they have some familiarity with it, even if they don't, to Patrick's point, but if they do, if they're just an engineer without ad tech experience, they can get so much further now today than they could have in the past and build quite meaningful things and actually be of service to the ad ops org. Whereas in the past, they could have very easily been like, I don't know anything about ad tech, I don't know anything about header bidding, I can't help you. Right. And it's very, very different.
Yeah, another thing that I can do, Prem, is when we were Cafe Mom, like we tried to get writers to write like 25 headlines per article. And we would have like a banded algorithm or something that would try to propose each one, or maybe the headline picture. And I think Stephanie's company likely does this exact sort of thing with it. It's so much easier to have a robot spit out 200 or 300 images or headlines to use with an article. Even if a human wrote the article, then the content promotion process can be completely optimized. And then all of those candidate headlines that we used to have to pull people's teeth and nails to get them to do it. They'd be like, why do I have to write more than 5 headlines? Why do I have to write more than 20 headlines? And we know, like on the data side, that the candidate headlines, like the number of them, really drove success. And you can test an enormous number of combinations of content promotion that you could not before. And on the buy side, like the same thing is true. Like their problems are very similar to the content promotion problems.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do stuff similar with the testing of headlines and whatnot. But I think Nils, you mentioned like medium to small publishers. What can they do? I think to go back to like ChatGPT. I was a one-person team trying to build out a massive first-party data strategy and to create segment descriptions that like were fluffy for sales. Took a lot of brain power from me to like build these out when I've already done all of the data science behind it to build the segment. So I found that ChatGPT took away that kind of time and pressure to make it more efficient, where I still built the segment. I still did all the analytics to understand the insights that were coming out of it. And I just plug it in, ask the right questions, and I have this amazing description, right? And I think those are like really easy ways to use AI that can be just like help you be more efficient in your day-to-day so that you can take on some more other things that are more important, right? Like not that segment descriptions aren't, but like it just takes a lot of time or like coordinating with marketing or whatnot, and it just makes it more efficient. But yeah.
I think the elephant in the room is when the AI actually writes the content for you. And I think with that, it's going to be quite difficult for the small to medium-sized publisher to compete with the shops that are able to just pump this stuff out without having some sort of independent voice. Like the models that exist right now are creativity restrained, but that is a choice that these companies have made that have published them. And the future set of options to generate content is not going to be as creativity constrained. And you will be able to say things like, write this in my voice, or write this in the style of, and then just point it to your website or your own content. So Raptive is building tools that enable creators to use generative AI to generate content, but in their own voice, on their own brand. And we think that's going to be important to differentiate yourself from pure content generation shops. There's a lot of low quality AI generated content right now, but if you look at the recent data, a lot of surveys are coming out one after the other, pointing to people preferring AI generated content over human written content when it actually has some of the handcuffs taken off of it that the current models have. So the the human first in content generation is not long for this world. The human will be providing the brand and the voice, and the work will be quite straightforward to find something to assist you.
I think, but there's lines, right, where that I think where you have to be drawn around that. I agree in general for a lot of the content, especially when you see things that are SEO kind of driven. But I think I read something, yesterday, just about review sites and the fact that so much of that has come up, and so much of that is AI kind of driven, and mainly because it's done well because you don't really have to have firsthand like experience with the product. You can just write a review based on the attributes about it, and Google kind of deprioritizing a lot of these particular sites just because they understands that there isn't real value there. And the reality is that when someone's looking for a review, you are trying to find someone's opinion that has actually handled the product themselves and have an opinion about it because of their experience with it directly, as opposed to broadly just reviewing the benefits, the pros and cons of a product's features that it generated off a site, which whether you do that with it via AI or do that via a person, which is what you can do today, there's a line there, right? Because when I'm looking for a review, I'm looking for someone's opinion about it because they sound like someone that's in my shoes, and I can imagine myself, with that product and having that similar experience, and that's the part that I think there's still a unique place for, right? Going back to your, the piece
Absolutely.
of
I think
having
audiences
a
are going to
voice.
learn. Oh, sorry, Prem, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just saying, I think audiences are going to learn to recognize some new things that they don't look for now, to your exact point. Like, if there's a video of someone unboxing a product, like maybe that adds some authenticity because that's very difficult to fake.
Sure.
We already see the trend of, as far as I saw, of people looking for these answers or for those reviews going into online communities, forums, Reddit, and so on, instead of actually looking at the review side. So specifically the amount of people searching for, okay, I want answers that are not written from editorial or AI. I want answers written from real humans with some like level of understanding, okay, there are multiple people confirming that opinion. Yeah.
What's going to be really interesting is when we have the same article, that if you have it reg-walled, you may be able to discover an enormous amount of information about someone as they fill out their registration. And you may want to show quite different articles to each person. So for Nils, I may recommend a very different restaurant than for Stephanie or for Prem. And when I show top 5 restaurants in Jersey City, New Jersey, they may be quite tailored. And I think that type of content generation will be really interesting. And I'm really curious if users find it authentic, because I would say, like, you're trying to predict what I'll like rather than telling me what is good. And I would find that problematic. But some users may eat it up. They talk about the reinforcement bubble of the social media algorithm feeds. People like it.
It takes the research out of, you don't have to do a research anymore, basically. You just go with what is recommended now. So I wanted to, we focused a lot about the entire content side, and I wanted to take a step into pretty much the side of the monetization itself. We have a lot of experts here, also technical people that can go quite deep. So when we look at, content side is one thing that is changing a lot. How we run and set up direct campaigns, programmatic, guaranteed ones, and so on. A lot of changing there, how we use the data, a lot of changing there. But if you look specifically right now, let's say a publisher, be it in the gaming space or be it in dictionary space or something else, that remains to have stable traffic and that doesn't have like a business of generating new content as much. For most publishers, we have a fixed amount of time people are spending on the domain. And within this amount of time, we need to generate revenue, but without hurting the possibility of the user not coming back. So in the end, we are basically working towards optimizing the user lifetime value. Of course, we can put more advertisements on the page, we can refresh more frequently, as was already mentioned, but that has long-term negative effects that we might not want. So And then there are parts which were not popular at all in the last couple of years, or one was, but then disappeared again and is now coming back up. If you look at traffic shaping, very new term to the publishing world, very known to SSPs, but to the publishers completely new. If you look at flooring, it was very popular with second price auction, but then it completely disappeared as publishers couldn't figure out how to do the first price auction, but it is completely reappearing. So I would like to dive a bit into these two. Stephanie, from your side, is traffic shaping and flooring an ongoing topic, or is that more, how do you see it?
It is. I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're a very different company than we were last year. So we're still working through a lot of those things. But, we came from a place where we didn't believe in flooring, right? And so then we're now approaching it with a different strategy this year. And so it's like, which one is going to monetize better? We'll wait and see. And then I have to say I'm not as well-versed in traffic shaping, so I'll definitely leave that to the other two guys. But yeah, it is definitely a major topic of conversation this year.
Thank you. If you look at the flooring, what is for you the goal? Is it to establish some level of quality, or is it for you to protect the direct sales business a bit from the programmatic side?
Bit of both. To be transparent, we're about 80-20 programmatic direct. And so we're obviously always trying to grow our direct business, but also need to protect our programmatic business, whether that's, a lot of it's in jeopardy this year with third-party cookies. So how do we go about mitigating risk there? A lot of that's through addressability and whatnot. And we've seen some success there, but I think until we get to a point where cookies are no longer, it's going to be hard to understand the impact, just because there's the easy button. Everyone wants to do the easy button. And adoption is a big part of that, not only with Privacy Sandbox, but just all the technologies out there for all sides of the coin to both buy and sell side to adopt in order to move forward.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So Patrick, you have a lot of experience on the flooring side yourself. You have already built systems for it. Do you want to dive a bit into as to what is the state? Does it do something nowadays?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think when the second price auction went away, we noticed a couple of the vendors just hung their hats up and pivoted. I remember Adomic and Ad Velvet and a few other companies just shut down their products or dramatically changed them. And people thought that, what's the point of a floor if you don't have a second price auction? Because the second price auction would reduce to the floor in the absence of a second bid, and provided an enormous amount of support to whatever that first bid was. But what we found through experimentation is that the floor still has an enormous effect on DSP behavior. And the reason for that is a couple things. One is, if you set the floor high enough and the DSP has two candidate campaigns in a very simple world, and one of them has a bid price above the floor and one has a bid price below the floor, they will not choose the bid price below the floor as their bid, and they will eliminate that campaign, and you'll get access to the campaign with the higher bid price that you may not have otherwise seen. And the other is, many DSPs seem to actually use the floor as an input to their bid shading algorithms that are attempting to put pressure below, so that they reduce the configured price from the advertiser, where the advertiser might say, I will bid $4. The bid shading algorithm takes it down to 2.5. But if you set the floor at 3, maybe they bid 3 or 3.30 or who knows what. So the floor is still absolutely effective. What we've seen recently is Google Ad Manager has come out with 2 settings that are quite interesting, and it's very difficult to get what I find to be a clear explanation of the difference between them. But one of them is an account setting that's been turned on for all publishers in GAM by default, that is called optimized pricing, that it attempts to set some flooring in the programmatic bid requests, so Open Bidding and Google Ad Manager, AdX Exchange. But if you go into your UPRs, you can actually turn on optimized flooring, which I believe is just a more aggressive version of it, but it also does something that is quite surprising to many publishers. If you have it on, it will lower your UPRs below what you have set up. So if you say, for example, like never sell this 970 by 90 unit below $10, and you turn on OF, it may lower it. It may sell it at $7. It may sell it at, or it may raise the floor to 13. It just takes it out of your control completely. And we found actually that we just turn this off because we can do better. But in pre-bid, we see the floors module is becoming the dominant way that people set floors. Most SSPs will accept a bid parameter with the floor, but they all are required to also acknowledge the floors module. If they can take a floor, they must be able to take one from the floors module. And we see a growing number of companies, including Magnite and PubMatic, and then specialty companies that are more focused, including Assertive Yield and some of their competitors, PubX and Intuwell. There's healthy competition in this market for setting a floor in the pre-bid floors module, and it's also very effective. The most effective strategies we find use the most current information as opposed to historical averages. And the more current information you can incorporate into your algorithm, the more powerful it tends to be. And by current, I'm referring to information that exists in the moment at the user session level.
Thank you.
Well, one thing I want to just clear, as far as draw a line distinction between that you said there, Patrick, is the GAM optimized or the optimized flooring versus a pre-bid solution, which is the kind of latter set you talked about. Assertive Yield has one, PubX AI. There's a big difference between the two. One being, the GAM the Google Ad Manager optimized flooring, really is applied to the AdX side. Those signals are in theory sent into the bid requests. But ultimately, anything you have running client side via pre-bid doesn't see those floors. They see the impact of them, meaning that they say they come back with a bid that's $1. Your optimized floor that gets run inside Google Ad Manager is $2. They lose the auction, right? But they don't get the signal that the floor was actually for that request. And to Patrick's point, the SSP, the DSPs don't see that, and ultimately they can't increase their bids if they had one. They might have had a $3 bid. They chose the $1 campaign because you had no floor come in. So I think the Google optimized floor is an okay start if you're doing nothing. But to Patrick's point, you can do a lot better. Whether you're doing it yourself or you're using a third-party vendor to go down this path, because then what you're doing is introducing the floor to the entire auction, all the participants, as opposed to just one side of it.
Yeah, Brent makes a very good point here. The floor that OB and AdX sees is typically unavailable to pre-bid. Yeah. And if you set up UPRs, you at least know what it is and could make it available to pre-bid. But if you turn on OF, it's just a secret floor that only Google Demand, including OB, has access to. And what will be really interesting is whether or not that secret floor is available to component sellers that also are OB sellers. So for example, OpenX is an OB seller and a component protected audience seller. It's unclear which floor they'll have access to. I don't think they have access to the same floor and protected audience that they currently see in OB.
One big challenge of setting floor prices is that it immediately, or in many cases, can trigger the traffic shaping to be more aggressive. So while from our side, from what we see is like there's positive impact for most partners immediately from applying the floor prices, as long as we're able to predict the user's value or the user's bid landscape very accurately. But for some partners and in certain cases, it results in immediate traffic shaping. So that means that while the bid request would have been good and we would have gotten a bid for it based on other historic and similar data, in many cases, actually the request doesn't even go to the DSPs anymore because the traffic shaping of the SSP is cutting it. Is that something which you have also been dealing with from your end or investigated yet?
So I might be in a unique situation where people don't really shape us. So I think maybe that's true for Stephanie as well. Like the mid-tier publisher sees a different situation in the shaping universe than the ComScore top 50.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we see this traffic shaping happening for large publishers as well, even if they have 90% US inventory, 3, 4, 5 billion impressions a month, it still occurs, not with all of the SSPs, but with some of them. But yeah, it's definitely way less for primarily US inventory, and the bigger the seed, the less shaping is happening or occurring.
Fair enough. Yeah, one thing that we do see is if that effect were occurring, I don't think we'd necessarily need to observe it to learn the appropriate floor, because I think that if we set the floor too high and it caused traffic shaping to occur as opposed to it just caused the DSP not to bid, our algorithm wouldn't differentiate those two events. It's not looking at like a no bid reason, and it would just lower the floor because of that. So that's really interesting as a reason why the floor can go too high. But I think that the flooring algorithm should generally account for that. One thing
goes back to just having
transparency.
It just goes back to just having transparency. I think we talked about this at the previous summit, but having transparency in a no bid result, right, from the SSPs. Do they get no bid because they got floored out? Did they get no bid because it was traffic shaped enough? Ultimately, it wasn't sent out to DSPs. Knowing why is really, what would be helpful in that scenario. Because without it, to your point, Patrick, it kind of doesn't matter. You're basically saying, look, whether you didn't bid because you didn't send the request out or you didn't bid because the floor is too high, at the end of the day, we're trying to protect the value of this impression. We expect it to be X, and that's what it is based on the data that you give us for either of those two reasons. But to your point, Nils, if they are doing traffic shaping, understanding the difference between the two allows you to have another level of granularity to optimize against, because it is another variable.
In the case of protected audience, we have a really interesting scenario where there may be up to 4 floors at play in a pre-bid SSP. So one example is a pre-bid SSP may have a floor of $1 that the publisher sets, and then they receive a bid on the contextual auction, say $2. They pass this back to pre-bid. They lose the pre-bid contextual auction, which clears at $3. They will have the option in the protected audience to set either the 1, the 2, the $3, or maybe even a fourth value that they're getting from GAM. If GAM starts returning the OF floor or the floor that it passes to OB bidders, or maybe they push all of these options to protected audience bidders, but which is really nice because it almost means publishers won't have to worry about floors too much in protected audience. However, the floor that you set in the contextual auction may dramatically impact the floor that you are setting in the protected audience auction. If, like we've noticed, for example, OpenX, if you look at their auction configs and protected audience, the bid price that they bid in their exchange bid is equal to the floor that they set in the protected audience auction. It's just the exact same value. And we can see that, for example, if you were to get higher bid density out of OpenX by, say, lowering your floors, then maybe you will end up with more floor coverage in your protected audience auction. So there's some interesting interplays there.
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics going on with the flooring overall. The thing I think we can summarize is that it is visible that DSPs or SSPs are reacting to floor prices in real time. It is possible to measure some uplift by doing an A/B test again, which wasn't, or we didn't know how to measure it for many years, let's say, while the move went from second price to first price. Of course, there are also long-term implications which are not measurable, but there is a base that can be measured, A/B same inventory as to how are these floors affecting the inventory, to the point of us not understanding if a request was traffic shaped or not. We do based on our response time. If the SSP is responding really fast, it's basically guaranteed that it was traffic shaped, more or less. So we do have this real-time feedback and can use that real-time feedback. It is a bit inconsistent for client-side traffic shaping, but for server-side within Prebid server, that is quite consistent.
I think it's really interesting also. A lot of people talk about floors to protect the value of their direct, but direct also has a similarly protective effect on programmatic. Like if you have a healthy portion of direct sales, then when you fail to get a bid for whatever reason, then you serve direct. And so you have more comfort to raise your floors if you have a healthy direct business. If you're purely programmatic, then you don't have that fallback to direct strategy available to you.
Doesn't that depend on where you serve your direct? I mean, by default, direct is served in sponsorship or standard, and that isn't really in competition with price priority line items, and therefore you're carving out inventory that could be more or less valuable than what it's being trafficked against.
I think that
Does that make
depends on the
sense?
publisher.
Yeah.
I think
I
you're
agree.
right, but we have a lot of random network impression directs to serve,
Yeah.
and we get to choose where to serve them. And there's one argument that well, if you just serve it where you didn't have any bids, you're just going to serve it to the robots and the garbage, and that's very reasonable. So you have to have another strategy in place to make sure that when you've raised your floors and you're planning to serve direct when someone doesn't bid, that you actually are just as good at identifying the robots and the low value inventory. So you're not just giving that to your direct partners, which is another algorithmic strategy to pursue.
Yeah. I mean, with the publishers I've worked with that are doing a lot of direct, they definitely, I don't think, are doing that at all, right? I mean, so it's a good. When we did at Ranker, we definitely, didn't run everything across standard when we were there. We understood that there was a portion of that open market inventory you wanted to serve across, and ideally find some sweet spot. But like, I think that the more beaten path around this is for publishers that don't know much about the programmatic side of it to the extent that they should. They're serving, because GAM is set up that way. Like you serve your direct over here, you serve your programmatic over here, and let it run, and then you aren't driving open market CPMs by running direct in that capacity. You're actually not impacting it at all as a result.
I think that's a big lost opportunity. If both channels are competing for the same inventory, they're pushing the price up.
Yeah.
One of the other big topics is, of course, in the market right now, the cookie deprecation, and as to what the effects are now. So I would like to spend the last 5 minutes looking at some data and inviting you to comment a bit on it as to what you think is going on. So we need to switch to the screen share. Thank you. All right. So at the moment, we are looking at Chrome traffic. I just picked 5 random domains. It is a good mix between some that are very strong on the direct sales side, some that are only programmatic, and it's also a mix between US and European traffic. And we are comparing at the moment in control group, we have undefined, which pretty much means cookies are available, none of the cookie deprecation information, or it's not part of a cookie deprecation. And then we have control 2, which means cookies are completely disabled and no alternatives are available. So this is pretty much a case and scenario as what we would also have in iOS or on Safari, but now limited to Android. To quickly take a look at the data and explain it a bit is that overall we can see a 34% decrease in the pre-bid performance. PBV stands for pre-bid 1 in terms of their share of voice. We have a 5% increase in dynamic allocation, which is ad exchange and open bidding, but primarily ad exchange. And then on the direct side, it is an increase of 23%. Now, this big increase here is, of course, from that one publisher that has huge amounts of direct, because all of the direct is catching up the changes happening on the basically programmatic side due to standard line items, sponsorships using the temporary CPM. Overall, when we look at it, the RPM, which includes unfilled impressions, in some cases is only down 20%. However, when we then look at the pre-bid RPM, meaning the competing highest bid against whatever is bidding, where we are down nearly 45%. If you look at the session revenue, it's down 42%. Why is the session revenue down further? It is because we have more unfilled impressions and less refreshes occurring because of that. So if in many cases, if an ad goes unfilled, a refresh is no longer performed. Yeah. So I just wanted to invite you to like share a bit like your observations and so on this topic. Stephanie, would you like to start?
Gosh, on the spot. I guess I'm not surprised.
You can also go start with Patrick or Prem if you prefer.
Sure.
Okay, Prem, do you want to kick it off?
I mean, just on your last point there, the session RPM dropping, and even though that's understandable, that and I know publishers that definitely and stacks that have the technique in play where you don't refresh when you don't fill. But I think just to counteract that, we all kind of understand now, even with reseller paths and the more demand, like you probably should be refreshing even if you don't fill. So this kind of reinstates that or reinforces that, like if you are going to start looking at this test, refresh becomes a bit more important, because the reality is even if you get no ad on a auction, you refresh that auction. And actually, we did this at one of my prior companies. We refresh that auction almost immediately. It's like another dice roll. It's an opportunity to still get some ad back. I get a bid back because of traffic shaping, because of price flooring. This isn't obviously the point of the test, but just to kind of point out that last bit there, and that there might be some things here when you look at your stack, you realize that with such a drastic drop, you need to kind of change things about your stack so that it can re-auction and entertain more opportunities in the supply.
But just add a word of caution to what Prem just said. Be careful not to cause an infinite loop. Where
yeah.
you're...
Well, you need a limit either way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ideally retrying it once.
Yeah.
And then stopping or pausing for at least 30 seconds or something. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we see very similar numbers. We are typically comparing label 2, 3, or 4 to the treatments, or maybe the control ones to the treatments, to try to get a pretty fair comparison where we're making sure everyone has a label. The unlabeled users seem to be a little bit different than the label 2, 3, and 4 users. For whatever reason, like failing to have a label seems to mean something. We see some very different things on pre-bid share of voice. So we see pre-bid share of voice go up quite substantially when a user doesn't have cookies. And we believe this is because of our identity strategies are more focused on the pre-bid SSPs than on AdX. And so when our identity strategies are the only identification methods available, AdX is less likely to win rather than more likely to win. That is something that we expect to hold past the end of the third-party cookie deprecation. We also see that AdX has some well over 90% of the protected audience auctions that they are winning. So they're absolutely dominating there. We see the control users in mode B who don't have cookies and also don't have sandbox are being outperformed by the users with sandbox in mode B who don't have cookies but do have sandbox by just a few percentage points. So the sandbox technologies are proving to be quite nascent. They're effective at improving monetization, but they have a long way to go in terms of adoption because the bid density just isn't there.
Thank you. So the data itself we're looking at is without identity recovery for this basically Chrome base. When we have the identity recovery in there, meaning the bid enrichment partners, identity solutions, the numbers don't look as bad. We usually then see the pre-bid performance being up around 30 to 40%. And then the difference is relatively small However, these solutions primarily operate on the US market. So for European publishers, it doesn't make a difference in the end. So that's a big thing. Like for European publishers, there's right now no solution. There's, of course, a thing going on with the telco ID solution, but the question remains as to if it will be legal, because if a telco gives a discount to the SIM card for basically allowing them to use the identity, well, the GDPR is saying you are not allowed to sell your data. So that remains to be seen if it will actually be, approved or not.
I think one thing that is inevitable is the economics of the reg wall are going to change dramatically. So right now, a registered user might be worth 50% more than a non-user. But when that changes to 4x or 5x more, publishers will be incentivized to throw up reg walls much more so than they do now. And we will see an enormous amount of dollars shift to them. If you are making $2 on registered users now, it's very easy to see a world where you're making 6 or 7 next year.
Yeah, absolutely. We can already see it even for publishers that don't have logged in users. If they work with a solution, identity solution that is able to match it to an email address, it has a significant impact coming both from LiveRamp, UID2, and some other partners.
I'm curious, Nils, what you see for the pure model of consent in the EU with these changing economics. Do you think it will become much more popular? Do you think people will lower the prices?
How do you mean it? Do you mind to rephrase it?
The pure model is the pay or okay model, where the CMP says, give us consent or register. And then give us a payment. And then publishers may lower their payment to 1 cent or something, so they just get the registration.
I think it's overall a tricky topic. So it was ruled to be okay in Germany. I think the EU would have ruled it not to be okay, this kind of model, because you're selling your data. So from my perspective, it remains to be seen if it will be overruled on the European end. Right now in Germany, it's very popular. In other European countries, it basically barely exists. And in Germany, it's popular because it was ruled to be okay to do this model. And the price going down, I doubt it, because I don't think the opt-in rate of people subscribing will significantly increase if they go down with the price.
Interesting.
So
I've heard that legality may actually be dependent on the price, that if people are saying pay us $10 or consent, then that price is so high compared to the revenue associated with advertising that it's not an even value exchange. But if you say, give me 25 cents or 25 euro cents, or whatever the English people use, then we may find a lot more popularity. I think it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think the big question really here will be if it will remain legal or if that will change. As if you look at the ruling around Facebook, it was pretty much the same model. There are other reasons, and of course it's a bigger company and so on, so there's a lot more pressure on that, also with the decisioning process, but in the end, the same rules have to apply too. Okay, quickly looking at, like I switched the report, basically comparing now Control 2, which is no cookies at all, no topics, versus the treatments where basically the topics API or sandbox is enabled. So what we see from our end is now that the difference remains relatively stable, where the share of revenue coming from Prebid itself is only down 3.5%. Dynamic allocation up by only around 1%, and then direct up a bit again from like the direct publisher. However, Amazon is down heavily. So from what we are seeing also across the board with a deeper analysis, not just the quick view here, is that Amazon is really hurting from most changes. And that might be from, I don't know how much it is from the TAM versus UIM integration.
We see something quite similar.
Thank you. So overall, we now see that like the topics API does have an impact on the performance. So it already is bringing in around 6% increase in the actual CPMs, around 9% on the Prebid side in the CPMs, and then also the page view revenue basically being up by the 6% as well. We still have less ads per session, which goes to unfilled and was not being refreshed. So there is a trend of it already recovering, and we have also seen these numbers slowly increase over time now. Yeah.
One thing that's proven very challenging for us is if we integrate with a component seller, one of the previous SSPs as a protected audience seller, then their revenue doesn't go into our normal reporting. So I'm curious if these data have accounted for that somehow, or these typically are just not including pre-bid component sellers.
Probably not much. Yeah.
That's going to be an interesting reporting challenge for everyone.
Yeah. Good. So then let's head to the questions. Good. So from Slavik, we got a question. There's a way to use AI to increase engagement, traffic, and monetization. Can you give some numbers on how that optimization works? So how is AI being used to improve engagement, traffic, and the monetization part? I think we already covered that to a good degree. Prem, would you like to summarize it, like just with a few bullet points from it?
We talked about, using AI for whether it's the dynamic flooring for traffic shaping, and ad layouts, right? Another piece of it. One piece, the other part that we didn't really go into, which I won't dive into deep, but is a content recommendation, which it's obviously something that we all used in the past, but I think most publishers have shied away from over the years and have used the tabulas and outbrains because you send it out to other sites, and that tends to have at times can certainly have negative impacts to how a publisher is classified, as we've seen. I think there's an opportunity there still now, especially with the being able to do revenue attribution, and this is something that I looked at quite a bit in the past. Being able to do revenue attribution, understanding how much your content is worth, and then doing content recommendation around that. So when you're recommending content that you're matching to a user, right, in your site, and even for unfilled ads, when you start looking at this side of it and what's happening, um, redirecting traffic within your site to the most valuable piece of content for that user starts to have a lot of value, right? And it's something that you don't tend to think about, but obviously an extra click within your site is worth something, and that is something that you can use as inventory, even though you're not getting paid by that vendor for that spot, but you yourself obviously are creating more traffic as a result of it, and it is a very valuable thing to do. So content recommendation starts to become an interesting play again, because you start to have this opportunity to lean into it quite a bit and understand, AI can help you with that, understanding the value of a piece of content and matching the content to user and marrying those.
One trick in this regard is if the publisher has multiple domains, sending that user to a different domain, as it is resetting a lot of the frequency caps. So
Yep.
the overall monetization will be higher just by sending the user to another domain, assuming he was on the current one for quite some while. In that regard, also, one thing we see which has or can have a pretty big impact when a publisher has their own video content and a click-to-play video, or like a click-to-play player on the page. And of course, you only want to run one play, either the click-to-play or the sticky one, is to understand how likely is it that the user will click, and what is the current demand situation behind the click-to-play video player versus the autoplay. And then understanding and making the decision as to what is better. Because if a user interacts with a click-to-play one, the session automatically becomes longer. While in contrast, if the autoplay video plays on the page, the session gets shorter. So it has both elements, different monetization, different level of CPMs and fill rate of both players, as well as the likelihood on will the user interact or not, and what impact does it have on engagement. So when we look at the holistic picture, it is possible to understand as to, does it make sense right now to go with a click-to-play and not use our autoplay? Or should we go with the autoplay because the user is very unlikely to click, but we know we will be able to fill at least a few impressions with the autoplay one.
The measurement piece of that, it can be pretty challenging because a lot of people will say that revenue per session is kind of the one metric to rule them all. what they optimize towards, and it's generally what we optimize toward. But there's a few others that are quite important. Obviously, the likelihood of the visitor to return within 30 days to see the content improves the user's lifetime value. But then also, one thing that we notice very few people measure is the probability of sharing the content. We found that if someone shares the content, it's the same as if they have added like 15 or 20 additional users. And that's an old number, and the social media reach of sharing news or content may have changed quite dramatically since we measured that. But it is very important to keep in mind that advertising revenue is not the only metric. And you need to be able to say that if a user will not share your content because of, for example, the video player, then it's important to come up with strategies to measure these alternative metrics and sum them together with user lifetime value.
Thank you. Stephanie, how is it in your case? Are you looking at the long-term revenue from a user? Is that like a metric you keep track of?
Yeah, we're definitely, revenue per session is our main KPI. And we are doing, as I mentioned at the beginning of this panel, we're doing a lot of work to kind of understand the value of that piece of content with a lot of those engagement metrics that Patrick just mentioned. And so we're hoping to kind of have a better cognitive brain around like what we should recommend, how to have a stickier experience, and kind of create that longevity. And so we're trying to look at some creative ways around that, but it's still in the works, so no results yet.
Stephanie, do you look at the probability of someone signing up for your newsletter as a KPI that you make layout decisions based on?
Yeah, I mean, we plan to. We kind of did a massive overhaul of all of our newsletter and subscription products this year, so we definitely need to kind of beef that back up, but that is part of the intent signal. I think it's a massive intent signal. Those communities are really, really important. And we see that especially around our sporting communities with under each of the like nation, we call them fan nations underneath Sports Illustrated, but they do community level at both high school, college, and professional sports. And so, yeah, those are high level of intent.
Thank you. So when we got one question or one comment from Rob Beeler on the topic of AI content, utility-focused content gets automated, but I don't just want the score of the game, I want the story behind the score, and I want it with personality. This, to some degree, from my perspective, goes a bit into the direction, will certain authors be followed more because I like their way of writing? Possibly, I don't know, but it's like, maybe there will be the personality of the author or the editorial person will become more important.
I don't think that stops AI generated content. I think in the very near future, I'll be able to write an article about X in the voice of Rob Beeler. And Rob Beeler may find that to be an excellent tool.
And then you license your way of writing, but you don't write it anymore. Okay. And then a question from Sherzad: how can AI help publishers choose the right demand partners for the right content they are producing, looking at the engagement and so on? So how would I use artificial intelligence to decide as to what demand partners I'm going to use or leverage, depending on the piece of content or type of user?
So I think that is something we covered a lot when we talked about traffic shaping, which demand partners are appropriate for which users. It's very important that you don't just have an algorithm that, for example, turns off PubMatic 12% of the time. You need to know which 12% of users, or turns off Cargo, or whoever you're working with, 80% of the time. Your traffic shaping algorithms need to be quite aware of the context and have varying probabilities for each bidder, for each user.
But this
There's also
really, I
the
mean, this
part.
isn't, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, this isn't really something I think most publishers can do themselves, right? Like, I don't think publishers have access to the granularity of data you would need to understand, not just how demand partners are performing at a URL level. That's obviously one piece of this, but then going and mapping that to categories across each piece of content and then understanding how are demand partners performing at whether it's IB categories or whatever you may want to break it down to in your system. How are demand partners, performing against a category, and then throw in the user base, whether it's demographic, whatever demographics you're going to break it down by, geo, browser, device type, all that. It gets very, very granular and very, very difficult very fast. So again, it's what makes sense, but I kind of stress the fact that this is probably down the path of a level of granularity that most pubs can't do themselves. You can't go in ChatGPT and ask them to build you a system to do this. You kind of need to go find someone that can help you bring this value to you, or work with a couple different vendors and kind of string them together to get this right. But it is the right path. I think it's just not there's no easy button for that yet.
One of the tricks
The
is if you're using an SSP as your wrapper solution, it's very difficult to trust them to do that shaping for you, right? They have some rather vested incentives. There's a lot of independent vendors in the marketplace, and then obviously the big ad management companies like Raptive and Freestar have solutions. But then it seems like there's a lot of emerging technologies, and many of them are taking a sustainability tilt to their marketing, where I think Assertive Yield, for example, has a partnership with Sidara, where their traffic shaping is showing demonstrable carbon reduction. So that's an interesting tilt where you can do traffic shaping and then potentially have access to more brand dollars that are trying to target green media. So there's all of these interesting interplays.
It is possible to build the traffic shaping in-house by, for example, if a bidder did not bid 3 times, I stop calling that partner. It's a very simple algorithm. The tricky part is that this algorithm does not consider frequency caps resetting and the page content changing and other variables that change. So all of a sudden the bidder can start to actually bid again. And the other important part is that it actually doesn't matter too much if they are bidding or not. What matters is if they are winning the impression and what their incremental value is they are adding to that impression that is being won. And doing that in a simple algorithm is very difficult. So when we do this cutting after they didn't respond for 3 times, it could have been because the cookie sync wasn't done. It could have been because this particular page has a brand safety filtering. Once they go to the next article, they start to bid again, and so on. So there are a lot of dynamics that make it difficult, and it is one of the challenges for which machine learning itself, or AI, is quite good at. But it is still very difficult and complex dealing with all of the seasonalities, so context switching and understanding that. And SSPs do it, and they do it quite well. But if we look at what the SSP is doing, is they do it at such a big level across thousands and thousands of publishers that the amount of attention they can give to a single publisher is tiny. So them understanding the differences in demand on what is happening for this publisher is very difficult. Also, when we look at how many times this SSP is winning, that is not a lot of information they have available compared to how much information the publisher has. As what we care about is incremental revenue. If we lose a bid, where we had another one that was 5 times higher, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But overall traffic shaping is very difficult to measure the effects as to how it is behaving, as it is slowly over time increasing, which then also makes it, difficult to basically exactly validate as to what are the effects long-term for it with market volatility changing. On that topic, Prem or Patrick, with the algorithms you have been working on, like how do you consider to be working or not working? Like how do you establish, okay, it is providing a positive value?
So revenue per session of if you have different behaviors and you can just turn something off or change the behavior and measure the revenue per session of different users. But as you point out, sometimes if you're affecting something like the floor price or the win rate, that may change DSP perception that don't know if they're in the A or the B group. And then it becomes important to A/B test over enormous swaths of inventory. So if you're A/B testing for SEO, people may just do different things on different articles on their website. But if you are A/B testing for something where you're changing the win rate of a bidder by trying to call them less when you don't think they will win, to see if they bid more often, then what you will find is that you need at least 30 or 40 websites to be able to conduct a test. We are able to do that, but many publishers are not.
But what about the longevity of that in terms of how valid the data is? Because something I've seen on the flooring side, and as I think about it when you're speaking, I think it applies to the traffic shaping side as well. Flooring in an A/B test, you can certainly see some immediate impact. The presence of a floor and no floor, right? But over time, let's say you keep that A/B test running over time just to be able to maintain the value of what a control is doing on its own, and it's weeks and weeks and weeks that go by because you're just monitoring the impact of your floors. If it's 95%, 5%, on that 5% of traffic, to your point, Patrick, the SSP, the DSP don't know that they're being floored or not necessarily. Now they could be if you're sending the request in, but they may not be if you're using UPRs, right? On the other side. So as a result, what they do is they're gonna train themselves to bid higher naturally because they need to do that to win the auctions. And what you end up having is your control starts to go up as well because it's the impact of it. And to the point that when you turn off floors, you'll still see this albeit degrading over time, but this impact where the floor value that you had will still maintain and it'll start to kind of drop as it realizes that it can bid shade all the way down and there's nothing pushing it back up. Point being is that the value of your floor, though it still is there, in the way that you track it over time starts to become a bit difficult. And again, applies to traffic shaping because if you start taking, again, using your example, Patrick, like if you go to an SSP and you remove them from 30% of your supply because you're like, hey, you're not going to see these inventory anymore because you don't bid on it. What you're telling that SSP is that my full inventory, my full supply is only 70% of the total. That's what you see. So they're gonna, if they're gonna do any sort of campaign adjustments and optimizations towards your traffic, they only see 70% of it. And if you all of a sudden open it back up, that doesn't mean that, like, and let's be more aggressive. Say you've taken away 70%, they only see 30%. If you open it up, it doesn't mean that what you saw in 30% automatically applies to 70%. It's not going to scale out, right? So it's just an interesting thing that I think I guess it's more just a point. You can see this value very, in my opinion, effectively right away. But the ability to track it, I don't think it's ineffective long term, but the ability to track it in the long term might become, quite a bit more difficult to be able to see and track that impact.
It's quite difficult. I can describe our strategy a little bit. So for a given impression, or for a given session, it's very straightforward to measure what's the impact of our floor strategy versus just no floors at all. And for most publishers with healthy floor strategies, I think that number is north of 10%, pretty much across the board for all of the various vendors advertising how they do against no floors. But suppose that the optimal RPS maximizing floor strategy. Like it's going to be dynamic floors, but you are choosing the strategy that optimizes RPS. But there's this theory that maybe that floor is not actually even high enough, that if you raised it further, then you would be able to teach DSPs basically, hey, you can't get it on the cheap. You're going to have to raise your bid prices. And the way that we can conduct a test like that is, say, take the optimal RPS floor, raise it by, say, 10% on 100 publishers, and then we can just simply observe after 90 days for those 100 publishers, did they do better than the other 3,000 plus publishers that are in the control group? And those types of experiments are quite interesting. And as you point out, they take some time to be able to evaluate, But we found actually that because so many of these flooring strategies are algorithmically driven rather than human driven, it's much less time than you would think. So you may be able to get reasonable results in 2 weeks.
Yeah, most of these systems look at 1 week of data, up to 2.
Yeah.
So across 2 weeks, it's definitely measurable. There's, of course, still the challenge of those 100 domains being very small amount of traffic on that seed compared to the 3,000, because a lot of the optimization also happens on the seed level, not just on the domain level. It gets too granular. If there's not enough traffic on the domain, there's no differentiation being made on the domain level from an SSP's perspective. They need to be really fast in deciding, do we run an auction, do we not? How many DSPs we include, which ones do we include? So one thing which I always would really like to have from the SSPs is provide information as to how big the auction size is. What is the average auction size? Tell us how many DSPs you included for this portion of traffic, because then we can get an understanding as to if we are traffic shaping, we have measurable numbers from their end. Okay, the auction size increased by 60%, 70%, 80%. And we can correlate that to what was before, what was after, as there's not as much impact of seasonality on that part anymore, compared to looking just at the CPMs and session CPMs. So we had one last question from Abi. Does cookieless monetization at this stage, is it very similar to basically ad block monetization? Do we expect this to remain similar, low value for the foreseeable future? I would claim to differ that it is very different. With the ad block monetization, yes, we have less cookie information available, but we still have some available from the domains that are approved. However, there's a second filter as to pretty much removing all of the high impact animated advertisements and so on, which has also negative impact on it, of course. And then on the cookieless inventory, yes, if you look at like recovery systems, bringing back some cookie information, more or less, it might be similar match rates as we have within the ad block inventory. However, as more and more is becoming cookieless, that is changing and shifting, and at some point it won't make a difference anymore. We do have to assume, and we do have to basically walk with the worst risks of seeing that similar kind of decline happening and rolling out across the board for Chrome. But I think it is very unlikely that this number wouldn't heavily improve over the next couple of months. Any closing remarks from Stephanie, Prem, or Patrick?
Thank you for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to chat with the rather illustrious group, Stephanie, Prem, and yourself, Nils. So thank you for including Raptive today.
Yeah,
Thank you, all of you.
Yeah.
All right, so then, yeah, thank you very much, Steph. Thank you very much, Stephanie, Prem, and Patrick for joining me. And to all the people watching, also thank you for joining us. We hope you found the entire session interesting and that we were able to share new information and provide some insights as to inner workings of the industry, what is changing, what are challenges, what are risks, what are opportunities. Yeah, that's pretty much it for today. So thank you all for joining. And again, thank you very much, Patrick, Bram, and Stephanie. Have a good evening or morning or rest of the day, depending where you are. Thank you.